Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be building one of the tiniest Warhammer dioramas ever. And we are starting with any good diorama, a piece of foam and the best air drying clay I can find. And my inspiration for this diorama all started when I found these tiny motorbikes that the Space Marines were riding on. I've heard about epic scale from the time before mine, and then I was introduced to what is now Titanicus scale. These tiny Space Marines are kind of cute, and I think they'll be great for this diorama. Anyway, quickly back to the diorama, we're going to grab some water quickly and slap it right on top of all that clay, as it's going to really smooth things out. As this is air drying clay, what basically happens is once all the clay is slapped on, the water inside the clay will slowly evaporate and harden the clay. So adding water will make it nice and smooth. And as you can see, I managed to find some really cool 3D printed resin rocks. And the general theme for this diorama, I originally was going to go a bit more aquatic, but in the end I wanted to go more of a jungle theme, with these cool rocks bursting through the ground. But in order to get this theme set, we're going to have to build our land speeder. Working at this kind of scale feels like such a daunting task to build things this small, and then the idea of painting things this small kind of scares me a little bit. So after finish building this land speeder, what feels like was like 30 pieces when it could have been 3 in all honesty, it's time to prime these miniatures. And for this I chose to base it in a nice light grey. And after priming the miniature, it's time to enter the dungeon. The place where there is no light, but is where I airbrush, which is basically right behind my desk. As our faction of choice today is going to be the white scars, as I kind of think it's probably the easiest thing to paint right now. I chose to airbrush white from above. Alright, now that we're back on my desk, it's time to get to all of that horrific detail. And for this I chose to add some nice red accents to the white undertones. And I started with the corn red as it's a really nice base tone, for what we are going to highlight later. And once I calm down my coffee jitters, it's time to paint all of the black under armour that is on this spacecraft. For this I chose Black Legion, which in my opinion is one of the best black paints out there. And just before we move on to the golden trim of the white scars, you might be noticing my paintbrushes are terrible. I don't know why I haven't bought any new ones, I've never had fancy ones, so take that as you will. But for this project, I think when you're painting small like this, you really got to make sure the tips of your brushes are nice and sharp. And I think one of the hardest things about painting white scars, now backtracking what I said earlier, is when we paint all of these nice trims, the silver and golds, you really got to make sure you don't get any of that onto the white armor, as it is a pain to try and repaint that white. So after adding all of our neon oranges to all of the light fixtures on this model craft, it's time to start highlighting up, and for this I'm going to start using a brighter red over all of the red areas. One of the things I do love though is adding these nice bright oranges to the las cannons and to where the batteries are on the vehicle, as I like to think they're burning in a raging hot fire. And after adding a grey wash that did pretty much nothing, it's time to go back to that trim and add a slight gold highlight, just gently stippling over all of the edges. Of which we then added a black enamel wash, which we then removed. And all I'm going to do to finish this model off is to add one more final red highlight on top, just to bring in some nice brightness to the model. And quickly jumping back over to the diorama, it's time to add some Smart Mud 2.0, which is going to act as our ground texture for the diorama. This is some really nice clay, and it's also air drying, which is a big bonus, and it looks just like, as the name says, some smart mud. And once that clay is dry, it's time to jazz things up a bit. And I found these amazing plant-like things, so I quickly drilled a hole and stuck them right in. And once they are dried fully in place, I grabbed some foam flocking. In this case, it was foam flocking that resembled these kind of small leaves. I then sprinkled it all over the diorama, and then made sure to brush it off any of the rocks, because I don't really want it to be stuck on the rocks. Then to stick everything down to the diorama, I grabbed some isopropyl alcohol and slowly dripped it over all of the clay. So what isopropyl alcohol will do in this case is when we add our white glue, it will soak right into all of the recesses on the diorama, making sure the white glue doesn't bobble on top. So in short, it allows all of the white glue to soak right in. And before priming outside, I did paint the whole of the base of the foam diorama with some paint on primer, just so that the spray can doesn't melt our diorama. And this is the part of the diorama where it finally starts to come to life. When it comes to painting the diorama, I wanted to add this foresty scene, so I started off with this really nice yellowy green contrast paint, spraying it pretty much all over the diorama. Then it was time to start adding some contrast and shades to the diorama, so I grabbed like a medium dark brown and slowly added it into where the muddy areas would be. I didn't use this that much, as if you use it too much you'll lose all the green, as brown is a very overpowering colour. And the final colour was some Dark Angels contrast paint, as this is a really nice foresty colour, and I just sprayed this in a quick burst from afar, coating pretty much the whole diorama but adding that nice foresty feel. And for when I painted the rocks, I grabbed a nice warm dark grey, which I heavily diluted to make it basically into a nice wash. I then put this over all of the white rocks, and it made this really nice, well, rock colour. And for all of the ground rocks, I used the same colour but less diluted, so it had a nice dark grey on it. Next, I slowly highlighted up by adding some lighter greys into the mix, and really lazily highlighting. I didn't really aim to add much highlighting, just kind of flicking my paintbrush wherever it led, making sure to stay on the rocks and not the grass. I also added some very slight edge highlights on the big rocks, with a nice light grey, just for some extra contrast. And as we approach to the end of the diorama, I'm actually pretty happy with how this turned out. I think it's a nice cohesive piece. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out my ego. And I'll make sure to catch you in the next one. I've been Reese, see ya.